Hi there. Welcome back to the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in this very special episode, we're going to be talking about a little film called Renfield.
Having grown sick and tired of his centuries as Dracula's lackey, Renfield finds a new lease on life, and maybe even redemption, when he falls for feisty, perennially angry traffic cop Rebecca Quincy. So Renfield is the sort of, I don't even want to say the latest Nicolas Cage movie, because this came out and then my other buddy mentioned watching another 2023 Nicolas Cage film. And it's like, oh my goodness, this guy is making stuff.
There's probably at least 3 Nicolas Cage films released between the time we watched Renfield and now.
Absolutely. It's bananas. So you got not one Nick, but 2 Nicks. You got Nicholas Hoult in here as well as Nicolas Cage. The traffic cop we mentioned before in the profile or bio of this movie is played by Awkwafina, who I remember from Shang-Chi and The Legend of the Ten Rings. I don't know if that was the full title. Was there 10 rings in that movie?
Oh, yeah. You better believe there were 10 rings.
Lots of rings. But also in this movie is Ben Schwartz, who I think personally I remember most from his appearances on Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was just like, I think I saw a comment where Ben Schwartz is playing at an energy level that only Nicolas Cage can match, and finally we have a film where the two of them, like, the energy is just, it does shine through the screen quite a bit.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think Ben Schwartz, if he's like an acquired taste, I don't know. I've seen some comments online where his antics or his particular shtick was not appreciated, but honestly, like I'm down for the Ben Schwartz. I love what he's I'm picking up what he's putting down. I'll put it that way.
Oh yeah. Without a doubt. This movie is directed by Chris McKay, who we talked about. His previous film is The Tomorrow War with Chris Pratt. I think both of us thought it was pretty garbage, but we do have a little half episode dedicated to it from a little while ago. So be sure to go check that out for our thoughts on that. But he also directed the Lego Batman movie, which I don't think we've ever talked about any of the Lego movies, you and I. Have you seen the Lego Batman film?
I have not, actually. I saw the original Lego movie. I thought it was really good. There's a really poignant, emotional catharsis at the end between the father and son, which came really, I think, really helped that movie. Overall, it was really solid. But Lego Batman is spoken highly of as well, and I've been meaning to watch it. I just haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah, I do remember that one pretty fondly. I don't think I rated it too high for whatever reason, but I'm anxious to go check it out again.
Yeah, it's definitely on the list now.
Chris McKay has also recently has some writing credit in the new Dungeons and Dragons movie with Chris Pine,
which is getting rave reviews as well, right?
Yeah, and honestly, I went to see it a few weeks ago, and it was a lot of fun. It was a good movie. But Renfield, I mean, not too long ago, we sort of, depends what timeline you're looking at. We published an episode on Day Shift, which was also dealing with vampires, and we released a little bonus episode talking about some of our favorite vampire films.
May have jumped the gun on that.
Yeah, without a doubt, because that was one of my first thoughts after watching Renfield is like, man, I don't know my vampire films at all here. Like the classic vampire, not the Bela Lugosi. Bela
Lugosi.
That was him,
He was
right?
the OG.
This
Bela
is
Lugosi back in 1931.
1931 Dracula, yeah. So I don't think either of us had seen it before watching Renfield. And there was, this was apparently in the making of some hint that maybe this would kind of be like a sequel to that original 1931 movie, but I kind of fell apart. There's a lot of the characters are.
Well, I mean, no, it's established that it's a direct sequel. It's definitely a direct sequel. They established that in the first couple of shots.
Perfect. That's good. Wikipedia has directed me incorrectly then. And what's really amazing is they inserted Nicolas Cage in that, and Nicholas Hoult, I think, into scenes from that Dracula film, like CGI'd them, dressed them up the same way, make up the effects, everything. It looked pretty good, but it was lost on us when we first watched it. I think I was peeing on your letterbox and you'd watch this old movie again. Like, tell us about that experience and how it affected your Renfield take.
Okay, so like you, I think neither of us had seen the original 1931 Dracula before watching Renfield. It was always on my list and it kept getting pushed to the side. But seeing those couple of opening scenes, I thought they had recreated the sets, but then you had looked it up and you had told me that they actually composited Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult into the actual footage. And I hadn't seen the movie, but I knew enough about film history, having my foot in that, or my toe in those waters. That's like, I knew it was from the original movie, just through pop culture references and whatnot. But in advance of this podcast, I wanted to go back and watch the original Dracula to compare it to. Couldn't find it it was on streaming, but I have to pay extra in addition to subscription. So I was like, forget it. I'll just go out and buy, because we got together a couple weeks ago. I happened to see the 4K Dracula. So this past weekend, actually, I went and picked up the Dracula 1931 restoration on 4K. Went down a bit of a rabbit hole. Watched it, not really knowing what to expect, because I had seen all like the parodies. You see the parodies on The Simpsons. You see like the Sesame Street, The Count, which is obviously based on Dracula. So I didn't really know what to expect, and honestly, I was blown away. I really loved that movie. I was up until like 2 a.m, kind of tossing. My mind wouldn't stop going over the movie. Like I was so obsessed with it. And then a bit of the rabbit hole, I was watching the special features, which were on the 4K disc instead of a separate Blu-ray disc, which was nice. And they mention something really, really interesting that piqued my interest. So they said that at the time, because it was just the beginning of the talkies, right? It was all silent films. And the director, what was it? Todd Browning, maybe, but he was a silent film director. It was just the beginning of like sound design, having people talk in movies, but they didn't have the technology yet, or it wasn't cost effective to have dubbing, right? To dub over different languages. And they wanted to capture the Spanish market. So their universal solution was to film the exact same film twice with 2 different casts and 2 different crews, one in English and one in Spanish. But the way they did it was they would have the exact same sets and the same, slightly different script, but exact same sets. And in the morning, the English cast and crew would go and film on that scene. And in the evening, the Spanish cast and crew would go and film the exact same scene on the exact same set.
Yeah. Huh.
And then I was looking around, I was like, oh, now I'm going to have to find the Spanish version because I need to compare them. And then I was like, this sucks. Like, how am I going to find this? Because it's probably esoteric. And I was looking at, I was about to turn the movie off, and I saw these 2 words pop up on the bottom of my menu that jumped out at me. And they said Spanish version. The Spanish version was included on the 4K that I bought. So I watched the Spanish version.
Oh, nice.
And it was so surreal. It was such an interesting cinematic experiment where you had these two versions of the same movie being filmed in the same set simultaneously.
Yeah,
it was
wild.
really neat, interesting to see different camera choices. I'll leave it up to audiences to decide which one was the better acting. I will say that Bela Lugosi is a legend for a reason.
Yeah.
But watching that original movie and then seeing Nicolas Cage, essentially, I think he was drawing on another version of Dracula. I think there's another version with like Frank Langella, or I think Christopher Lee do a version of Dracula. There's a couple different versions throughout. Throughout the ages. It's long enough to say ages, but to see essentially Nicolas Cage, I think that was one of the things that must have drawn him to this, because Nicolas Cage, you hear him in interviews, he's such a film buff and he loves all these old films. So for him to be essentially kind of inserted into that film history, essentially like the continuation of Bela Lugosi, even in a kind of unofficial way, that must have been such a thrill for him, such a draw for the project. But it made me like Renfield even more in a weird way, having it be almost an unofficial continuation of that story. And it's interesting too, because in the 1931 version, Dracula is killed, but you don't see the death on screen, and Renfield is supposedly killed, but you don't see the death on screen. So like the Renfield, the movie, kind of works as a sequel because it's left ambiguous. It's ambiguous enough that these characters are still alive, which I thought was like, this is kind of brilliant. But that was Renfield. Renfield was a lot better than I was expecting. Like when you kept suggesting when I was down visiting you a couple of weeks ago, let's go to the movies and see Renfield. And quietly inside, I was like, no, nothing about the advertising made me want to see this movie.
Really?
But I think you had seen all the other kind of major releases, and so I was like, I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't want to be rude.
Unbelievable! This is all coming to light now. Wow.
But I will say, I was really pleasantly surprised with Renfield. Not just how it kind of carried on that tradition, it put its own spin on one of these classic, iconic monsters or villains or mythologies, horror mythologies maybe. But just in general, it was a lot better than what I was expecting. And I think, I don't know, for me, the advertising did not do it justice. The marketing campaign was not super great. Overall, A, it was better than I expected, and B, it sent me down this rabbit hole. Now I'm obsessed with watching these Dracula films. I rewatched Bram Stoker's Dracula recently. Again. I just noticed I have Van Helsing. I forgot I own that. I might pop that in at some point. But I'm now on this quest to find all these other Dracula movies. Renfield has inspired me now.
I saw a piece of trivia about Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah.
And I don't know how true this trivia is because it probably just came off of IMDb, but it was saying the studio wanted Nicolas Cage to play not but Keanu Reeves' role. And forgive me because I can't remember.
Harker.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, John Harker.
But based on a previous film Coppola did with Nick Cage was not a super pleasant experience. And so Coppola was like, no, thanks. I'm not putting Cage into this movie, which is why we got Keanu Reeves in the end.
Some family drama there.
Yeah. And it was just like, it was funny because
his uncle didn't want to work with him.
Yeah.
That hurts.
But supposedly Nicolas Cage, this is like one of the three main roles he's always wanted to play. Was Dracula. He always wanted to play Superman. And forgive me, I can't remember the last one off the top of my head here, but he's been able to play essentially a couple of these roles now. And with Renfield, he finally gets to play Dracula. And you can tell he's really enjoyed it. He really loves it. And interestingly enough,
perfect.
Like he understood it was going to be like this comedy horror thing. And he is very well versed in the Dracula world. And he wanted to sort of put his own little spin on it. Now, of course, I'm just reading this off Wikipedia, but he mentioned for inspiration for this particular role, he took from American Werewolf in London, Ring, and Malignant from a couple years ago, if you can believe it. And yeah, you can see like especially Malignant, there's a little bit of darker humor in there. Ring, definitely more traditional, like straightforward scare. And American Werewolf in London, masterclass in comedy horror right there. But man, his performance here was great. But I'm still shocked that you didn't want to go see this in theaters. And I thought I was doing you a favor too, holding off on watching this because you are trying to watch every single Nicolas Cage movie. And here we are presented with a brand new one in theaters. This was a no-brainer in my mind that we go see Renfield.
Yeah, well, I don't know, the focus on. Listen, I love Nicholas Hoult. He's been in some great stuff. You look at his turns in, X-Men and Mad Max alone. The dude's great in everything he does. But his character looks super boring in the ads. And I was like, I don't want to watch a whole movie based around his character. And then Nicolas Cage pops in occasionally. But I'm happy to be proven wrong. Nicolas Cage was in it a fair amount and in some pretty gnarly makeup at times. But he was given a lot to do. And Nicholas Holt's character was a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be. Also a lot less deranged than the 1931.
I just watched that a couple nights ago, and it was really interesting seeing those characters on screen, especially Renfield. Isn't he locked away in a bit of the asylum for a few minutes, but he's always able to just like get out of his cell and go talk to Van Helsing and whatnot.
It's an ongoing thing where he's got like, he's getting either help from Dracula or he's got some kind of supernatural powers, but like they keep locking. He's in an asylum, and he's like, that actor was like, he was going full cage. Like he was getting 100%, 110%. But yeah, one of the recurring things was like, oh, you never see it on screen, but he keeps escaping. They keep putting him in like more difficult rooms to escape from, but he's constantly escaping, and he's out on the grounds. I don't know if in that version they talk about how he bent the bars or something or escaped, but there's like they were implying supernatural strength. It was really interesting how they did it back then.
Because I don't think I had heard before, like especially in Renfield here, where like Dracula's lackey, like his familiar, will also be given some powers. They sort of get their powers through eating live insects. This is not something I was familiar with in any of the Dracula content or vampire content that I read before, or it's not read. I'm not that big of a reader, but I watched before in any of the TV or movies that I'd taken in. So it's kind of interesting twist to see it here, and then seeing it, the foundation of that in that original Dracula film from 1931.
Yeah.
Like, it was hinted at that. Yeah. A familiar would stick around for centuries. Like they sort of make them immortal. They give them a very small slice of the vampire's power was a nice concept that had its roots back then too.
Yeah, that whole idea, and then seeing that even in Day Shift, which we just released an episode, not just released, probably by the time we release this, it'll be months gone. But the vampires had familiars, so it's interesting to see like that whole mythology, like bits and pieces of it are still being informed by not just Bram Stoker's original, but by the 1931 classic movie, which somebody in one of the special features, one of the documentaries, people were saying is like, oh yeah, and some Bela Lugosi was so iconic in that role that anybody playing Dracula since then is like they're to some degree they're playing against Bela Lugosi, whether they're imitating him, or whether they're trying to get away from that. But it's like it's really interesting to see how that influences come down and some of the classic lines. I didn't realize were lines from that original movie. Mm-hmm. Like I don't drink wine.
Yeah.
Listen to the children of the night. Their sweet music. But yeah, Nicolas Cage put his own spin on it as he always does. Yeah, there was some gnarly stuff in here, but like the tone of this movie they set pretty early on with the balance between A, the humor of it, and B, just the over the top violence, which I wasn't expecting that much blood and gore in this movie. The ads, again, the marketing really did not. Maybe it's a difficult tone to sell in a trailer, but they definitely did not do this movie justice. Like as soon as like one of the first scenes where he goes and because I think Renfield's at the point where he's still bringing victims for his for Dracula to drain and to drink their blood, but he's trying to do it he's trying to like get like quote unquote bad guys. Right, like the drug dealers and like wife beaters, because he goes to this self-help group, and people talk about like, oh, this abusive boyfriend is like, oh, what's the name again? And he goes and like those are the people he's trying to bring to Dracula. So he's trying to approach it, trying to have some kind of moral code about who he's the victims he's bringing to his evil master. But the one fight where he like punches the guy's head straight off.
Yeah.
And there's blood spurting everywhere. It's like, okay, it's that kind of movie.
Yeah. They definitely throw you into the deep end right away. And they don't really, you may not have a sense of that level. And it just, even later in the movie, like it kept surprising me how much gore was. Like when someone's head comes off, it's gallons and gallons of like spurting blood. Like it's a fountain. And it's just like, there's like nothing subtle
style,
about
Kill Bill style, buckets of blood spurting
and it was
everywhere.
very goopy blood in this one. It wasn't even like sprays. There was just like this heavy, thick liquid that was just blasted everywhere.
I wonder how much of it was actual real blood on set, because I was reading an interview with Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult where they talked about, we had to get this take right because otherwise I'd have to reset and clean up all the blood and everything. Going back and watching it, I just naturally assumed now that everything is mostly CGI blood, but maybe going back with fresh eyes, maybe there was a lot more. I don't know to what degree. Like there must be a blend of like on set fake blood, but they must enhance it with CGI blood afterwards, I guess.
Well, whenever I see like that level of blood, I'm thinking this is just all CGI blood I'm seeing here. It's like, it's tough to tell how much is actually on set or not, especially when it's not directly interacting with an actor. Like here, he punches the guy's head off, blood is spraying everywhere, but none of it's getting on him. You know what I mean? Where this is fresh in my mind, I watched a couple days ago, is Evil Dead Rise. There is a ton of blood on set. You know what I mean? It's just like like the actors are slipping in it. They're covered in it head to toe. They're interacting with it a lot more than a movie like this, where I feel like it's added as well just for like the comedic effect. And there were a couple of moments where I was like, maybe this is too much. Like the comedy is fine. I don't need this level of gore in it. But since, it's probably an R-rated movie, they're just going to go all in on it regardless.
I need more gore. I need more scenes where somebody rips another human being's arms off and then starts using them as nunchucks and then throws them across the courtyard to impale another bad guy against the door with the bone from the broken off arm. I need more scenes like that. Like it was just over the top. It was, I think tonally, at least it was consistent, right? It was like, okay, they committed to the over the top kind of gore aspect of it, which was I think that's one of the selling points of the movie. Is like this movie had a really good sense of itself, knew exactly what it was, and I think all the actors knew exactly what kind of movie they were in.
Yeah, without a doubt. One of the major complaints I saw, or maybe not major, but consistent complaints about the movie, is that we wanted more Nicolas Cage as Dracula. Like there are sections where he's just not present because it's really about Renfield and his, him trying to sort of like get away from his role in helping Dracula, and also with the time spent with the traffic cop and her story and like trying to take down like this mafia family that like owns the entire town. We just wanted to see more Dracula and more Nicolas Cage in here, but I didn't really get a sense of that when I was watching the movie because this is a short film. This is just like hovering right around 90 minutes. I felt like it was a pretty quick run through of the movie, and I would imagine on rewatches, I'm not going to notice that even any less or more so. It's just I think this movie will lend itself well to being seen again.
Oh yeah, it was definitely. It did not overstay its welcome.
Did you like the mafia family aspect of it and that whole sort of storyline, how they got intermixed with everything?
Yeah, I thought it was okay. I didn't hate it, I guess. I think there was a parallel there, or there was like, it was obviously kind of creating this opportunity for, essentially, as we saw later on, a partnership between Dracula and a crime family or mafia family, because like, oh, he's gonna need some minions eventually. If Renfield's gonna turn on him, he's gonna need some other minions. So like, this is pretty. Essentially, you have the crime family is almost like a handy pre-made set of minions who will do their bidding for an evil master. So interesting. I think their family's name was like Lobo. I think they were the Lobos, which I think Lobo is like Spanish for wolf, right? So I'm wondering if that was like a little nod to like the universal, like the larger universal kind of movie monster history there. Is like, oh, could a sequel to Renfield deal with the Wolfman maybe? Is it a family of werewolves?
So. Like it is funny. I wouldn't mind seeing more like in this universe. Would Nick Cage sign up for more Renfield movies, like more Dracula appearances, or is this kind of like a one and done situation?
Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting because like one of the things I did like though, that they talked about, everybody, like not everybody, I shouldn't generalize, but like when Nick Cage was on screen, the interactions between Nicolas Cage and Nicholas Hoult as Dracula and Renfield, like there was obviously humor in there, and there's some dramatic tension, but they really did delve into the psychology of these characters. And the
Yeah.
movie focuses a lot specifically on codependence, where they're, I think, weirdly enough, even though Dracula is clearly very abusive in their relationship, emotionally and otherwise, I think at one point he disembowels Renfield just to prove a point that his blood he needs his blood to heal him if he gets super badly wounded. I think in a weird way, Dracula does love Renfield, and Renfield does actually care about Dracula, but they're kind of, that love is intermingled with this. There's something very abusive and manipulative about the way Dracula treats Renfield, which they delve into. At one point, there's a poignant scene. It's a comic scene, but it's also pretty poignant, where Renfield has gone on this spree where he's kind of started to break away from Dracula's influence. He went shopping at the Gap and got all gapped up, and he was been going to the self-help group. But Dracula shows up finally and is like, "Where you been, buddy, old pal? Like, where's all I need my fresh blood here to get back at full strength." And Renfield's trying to explain to him, and like kind of mirroring a scene from earlier in the movie where some vampire hunters had used the Bible and were reading from the Bible, passages to try and, exile the Dark One's soul to the nether regions or whatever, send him back to hell. And he pulls out one of these self-help books, and he's reciting some of these, like he's talking about toxic relationships, and he's reciting some of these passages as a way to, start to explain. He's trying to exercise like an emotional demon, right? Essentially. And it's and Dracula keeps going forward. It's like, what do you, and you see this look on his face, like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? What is this book? And Renfield's trying to articulate all the reinforcements, the positive reinforcement he's gotten from his support group there. And it's not having the intended effect, right? It's like, because it never really does, right? You think like, oh, if I just confront this person, explain to them like why I'm feeling this way. And it's like, Dracula's like, he's having none of it, right? There's a conflict there where Dracula's still like, oh, I gave you this long life and I thought we had something. It's way more psychologically complex than I was expecting in this horror comedy movie. And I would like to see more of that develop on screen, because that was really, really interesting, and really, for this horror comedy to have that kind of really poignant emotional core. And even later on when Renfield realizes like, oh yeah, it kind of takes two to tango, where it's like, I keep blaming Dracula for all my problems, but like he admits to Awkwafina's character later is like, no, it was my own greed, right? I left my wife and family 100 years ago to do this big real estate deal because I thought it was going to be, which is how he meets Dracula. He thought it was going to be his big break. And then he gets seduced by Dracula and is like, oh no, I'm going to live forever or whatever. But the things he has to do, i.e. either murder or bring people to be murdered, innocent people, he realizes like, I can't put all the blame on Dracula. I was complicit in this to a degree as well. Yeah, like that was really engaging. It was really kind of fresh. I don't know if that's been an overused adjective, but definitely I can see why people wanted more Dracula, but I think they were smart to keep it to, I think it was like 4 or 5 key scenes between the two of them. Because it really was about, like, I think seeing it from Renfield's perspective, I think that was important to keep it from Renfield's perspective.
Some of the Dracula scenes we did see were magnificent, because you get to see like the extent of his powers. And like when I think they discover his lair, like the mafia family discovers his lair, is just like, oh, we're going in. And like you see how quickly he's able to like dispose of just like regular schmucks who come in with guns, and you're like, oh yeah, Dracula's got powers. At one point, doesn't he sort of turn into like smoke and go inside the priest and explode him from the inside out? Or am I thinking of something else? But he's able to transform in different animals, and we're led to believe that he's not even at full power, because essentially the reason they're moving is because they need to regenerate his abilities. Like he needs to get like the good fresh blood. And I love that aspect too, where it's like Renfield is bringing him criminals. He's doing a Dexter that you talked about before, where it's just like
Dexter. Yes.
Yeah, he's a killer with like some morals. But Dracula's like, yeah, you can give me this, but it's garbage. It's like eating fast food and trying to get healthy off of fast food. But I need to get the good stuff. And he explains the good stuff as essentially like innocent victims. And he lists, like, it's pure comedy. I can understand maybe it doesn't play for everybody. He's like, yeah, you need to get me like priests. You need to get me a busload of cheerleaders. Like, you need to get me all this stuff. And it's just like the next scene, he's going out to like some random bar and all the people Dracula mentioned show up. Like, he looks out the window and a busload of cheerleaders shows up. And you're like, oh my God, this cannot be happening right now. But it does, and it's hilarious.
Yeah, and the whole that whole scene there early on with the makeup on Nicolas Cage as Dracula as he's recovering. It was like a century ago or something where he was fighting some vampire hunters and he got hit by a full blast of sunlight and he was like down to like almost like just like skin and it was just almost on like bones and some flesh. And then like you see him like a century later and he's been slowly recovering, but he's like still all like the skin and like flesh kind of hanging off his face, and it's like he's like half formed. Also, I gotta mention the set design because that his throne there with all the blood bags around it and the lighting was like
incredible.
That's iconic right there. Like that's gonna be like a screensaver. Like that's like that. It's just so creative. Props to the set design, whoever did that. But yeah, the scene where he was taking out all the bad guys, he still wasn't, I think you're right, he still wasn't at full power because I think after that he goes and, spoilers, kills the all the support group to kind of get back at Renfield. Because you see his face is still like kind of crack, almost like the Mass Effect kind of renegade cracks on his face still.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, it's great. It's like they come in here, it's like because Renfield had killed some of the mafia's people, not the mafia, this crime family's people, and they tracked Renfield down to Dracula's hideout, and Dracula's not having any of it. He dispatches with them with such ease, and then he turns into a what do you call a group of bats? It's not a flock, is it? Oh, I don't even know, but turns into a bunch of bats and he flies out. Special effects in this are great. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It's disappointing that audiences did not turn out for this movie because we watched this. I don't even know if it was opening. I think it was opening weekend actually, and the audience we were with was pretty good. There were some hearty chuckles throughout, but we also went to like a morning show. It was around 11:30.
Yeah, 11:30, I think.
Which, you never know. You're not going to get very many people showing up there, but in general, audience did not show up for this movie. Like it grossed $18 million at the box office in the past couple of weeks.
Oh, that's too bad.
So it's probably considered a bit of a failure. I think its budget was around $60 million. So any chances of seeing any more of these is probably pretty slim, unless it finds some cult following over the next few years, which is very, very possible. I hope is likely because there's a lot of good stuff to like this. And going back to what you're saying about the characters, and here we are with like this horror comedy with actual character arcs and people learning nice things. It was just like, oh, that was really nice to see. It's just for a 90-minute movie, a lot of stuff happens to the characters here. I thought it was just really good overall.
Even Awkwafina's character there, can't remember the name of the officer, Rebecca something, which I would say is like kind of like the least interesting. It was kind of a thankless role. She was kind of playing the straight woman to all the craziness going on. But even that, it was still like a catharsis between her and her sister. Like that was pretty at the end when Dracula had her and he's like, her sister was on the table about to be either she was already dead or on the brink of death. And he was like, well, if you join me and become a servant, I'll save your sister. And I was like, that's a really tough choice, right? It's like you felt for that character in that moment. So even the kind of like the I would say like almost the B story, I guess, the B story characters, they still get their moments to shine. Ben Schwartz's character gets his moment in the sun when he becomes what he thinks is a sweet deal is like, oh, he becomes one of Dracula's minions. And Renfield's like, dude, you don't know what you've gotten yourself into. And I think he said something like, yeah, no, what are you talking about? I don't mind serving master. And it's like, what did I just say? Say, yeah, exactly. Like he's essentially enslaving your mind. Like he manipulates you to use you, but you think you have power, but he's actually has power over you, right?
Yeah.
But he was too, obviously the character, you saw him earlier, he's too stupid to, think through the consequences of his actions. He's like, oh, cool, supernatural powers, sign me up.
And I like that Renfield is like, even though now he's fighting essentially people on the same power level after he eats a few insects, it was just like, he still knows the combat. He's still like, he's used to this power. Yeah. And it's still a good action scene between him and others, because the earlier action scene is him just fighting like regular, SWAT team cops or whatever. And that's where he's tearing their arms out.
Cutting people's arms off with the serving trays. And
so I like that juxtaposition of like, you see his earlier powers, like, oh, you eat a couple insects and he can demolish 20 well-armed cops fairly easily. And then here's like 4 superpowered guys like him, and it's going to be a struggle. And seeing those two action scenes up against each other was really nice. And of course he comes out victorious.
It was a really like great way to ratchet up the tension and the stakes. Cause like, how's he going to do this? And they actually played it where he was having to, like at the end, I think he was like battered and bruised even.
Yeah.
Like he looked like he'd been through a real fight. It's like they didn't need to go that extra mile, like to make him look like he'd been in the Raid Redemption or something, right? But like he looked like Nicholas Hoult looked like he'd been through the ringer after that fight, right? So it looked like he was earned, right? They kept upping the stakes with like, oh, the first fight was a bunch of low level mafia dudes. First fight was actually him and a bunch of a bunch of no good thieves who stolen from the mafia dudes. Yeah. Then like he's fighting the corrupt cops and the mafia guys together, and they're in their armor and everything. And finally, like he's fighting people with his power level. But like you said, it's like, oh yeah, he's had this power for centuries, so he's got a few tricks up his sleeve still.
Yeah.
And when he like liquefies all the bones in that guy's body at the end with like his
pretty gnarly
super Dragon Ball Z punch. I love how they do that cut away to the X-ray vision, and you see the bones just all. It shows you the bones liquefying. It's like such a cool visual just to show the power of that hit.
It just reminds me of what I saw that was like, there was a Fight Club video game on the original Xbox back in the 2000s. And it was like, if you certain moves, like you could punch someone in like the top of the head or something, and it would cut to an X-ray view of their body, and you would see like the shockwave traveling down their spine and them falling to the ground. And you're like, oh, that person is incapacitated, but no, they could just jump back up and keep fighting as long as they had something in their life bar. But it was kind of fun to see that on the big screen. It was cool. Used properly.
I think like the action in this was great too. Action horror comedy. It was horrifying. I think you probably don't want to bring little kids to see this with like the buckets of blood, not just the buckets of blood, but the actual, the violence of dismemberment and disemboweling and so many heads getting ripped off, punched off.
Honestly, Nick Cage was menacing in a few shots, right? Like you understand why Dracula is feared. It's like he was able to harness that. Like he was kind of goofy at times, but he was also deadly serious at other times. And you could see like he was a scary monster, really. Like he is a monster. You kind of lose sight of that every so often when you're watching this, especially when he's spending like the first quarter of the movie is kind of like a weak skeleton hiding in the shadows, right?
Credit to Chris McKay though, because like there's that one scene again where Dracula goes to kind of out of revenge. He goes to kill the support group that Renfield's been going to, and it's at the beginning of the scene. It's like it's kind of comedic where like they're welcoming him in. Because I think one of the vampire rules, it wasn't in the 1931 version, but somewhere along the way there's this rule is like, oh, the vampire has to be welcomed in. You can't come into your house. You can't cross the threshold unless you willingly let them in, let the right one in. But it's kind of played comedically. But then when he reveals who he is, and it's like, oh my God, and it turns really menacing really quickly. And that's a difficult tonal shift to manage effectively. And props to Chris McKay, where like there's a couple scenes where there's like a tonal shift like that, where it's like, oh yeah, it's comedy, but now this is horrific. And like it, like you said, like Nicolas Cage, he goes from like the kind of corny, hammy, over the top, and all of a sudden he's like, oh no, I believe that this guy would actually rip my throat out, and it's like it's very hard to pull that off. And this movie effectively does it in a couple scenes like that. It was pretty impressive.
It was a very upsetting scene too, because he
was.
literally kills this entire support group who we meet with numerous times, and you're like, these are actual innocent people trying to better themselves. And of course, the movie isn't completely sadistic. It gives us some respite at the end where Nicholas Hoult takes like a bucket of Dracula's blood, which is established to have healing properties, and he goes back and is able to just like feed people this blood and bring them all back to life. And
bring them back to life. Although they've seen things they can't unsee, and they know things that they can't unknow.
That was a really good line. I liked that a lot.
Yeah,
I do like it when they sort of hint at like there is an actual like afterlife, and it's really horrible, and in the movie we don't need to show you this thing, but it's like even in sort of a comedy like this, him just coming out and be like, I can't unknow what just happened. It's just like there's some true horror out there.
Yeah, I think that the actor's name was Brandon Scott. I gotta give him props because he was really funny in that too as the leader of the support group, but without going too far over the top. There's a very specific kind of range of tone you have to maintain, because you could easily take this and go like 150 or 200%, and then you'd feel like you were it'd be like too much. So like there was enough. He took it just to I think all the actors took it like just to that line, but they were all tonally really consistent. And I thought that was, it's hard to pull off, right? It's hard to get that tone correctly, especially when you're dealing with something like, I think horror and comedy, they go naturally together, but it's not always necessarily the easiest thing to balance and to balance well.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to mention here before we get into our ratings on this movie?
One other actor. There's a bunch of actors in here you got to check out, but Shorey Agdashlu, who I love her voice. It sounds like she gargled an ashtray of cigarettes for breakfast. But her voice, she's been in a lot. She was in The Expanse. Probably people will know her from The Expanse. If you're a Mass Effect fan, you'll know her as one of the Quarian admirals.
Prolific voice actor, but here's a few movies she was in as well as X-Men: The Last Stand. She's in Ghostbusters Afterlife more recently,
yes.
Star Trek Beyond, Percy Jackson, The Lake House with the aforementioned Keanu Reeves. I think I first saw her in The House of Sand and Fog way back in the day with Ben Kingsley.
Oh, she is in that, yes.
Yeah, but she's in a ton of stuff.
Phenomenal,
she's great.
Phenomenal actor, and I think I would say that Morgan Freeman is the male version of her. I'll switch it around because they both have these really iconic voices. I could listen to her narrate anything. You have her narrate, I'll sit there and listen for hours. It's just there's something about her voice. To say nothing of her actual screen presence, right? She's always a joy to see on screen, but that voice, oh my God, it's got such a wonderful texture to it. It's amazing.
So we use the Letterboxd rating system, which gives an opportunity for up to 5 stars, as well as a like bonus on top of that. Where do you land? What's your 5-star rating on this movie, Renfield?
Okay, this was really tough. I'm still not sure. I wish there was a way to do I have it currently rated at 3.5 out of 5 stars.
Yeah.
And then I put the heart on there because I was like, I needed a 3.75. I don't know. I might be able to up to just a 4 because but I don't know. This is where I get hung up. Where it's like, what categories do I use? Because we came out of this movie and you and I were talking. I just had such a blast watch this movie. It was a ton of fun, a lot deeper than I expected, but a lot more exciting, a lot more horrific, a lot funnier than I had expected. And you and I talking afterwards just made me like it even more. So I might bump this up to a 4 at some point. I don't know. It's one of those ones where there was just a little, maybe something missing. Maybe like people were saying, maybe that kind of that B plot with the mafia, maybe it didn't really quite click into all the other stuff. Something, I don't know. I really liked the movie, but on the other hand, it didn't have a certain je ne sais quoi to bump it into like the 4.5, 5-star range. I don't know. So I found it really difficult to rate this one. How about you, Brian? What did you put this at?
So I initially put it at 3.5.
Okay.
And we've talked about this before where there's the podcast effect. I mean, where we do an hour of talking about this film and we appreciate that much more. But this one, you had to double up with that. This is one of the rare times we actually went out to the theater to see a movie together because we live in separate cities. And we're seeing a movie. We both have these large popcorns, large sodas. There's a positive audience there.
Yeah.
We're walking out and we're having a good weekend. We're talking about this movie. We're going out watching more vampire films like the original Dracula, and all of that boosts the overall experience. And I'm thinking, man, how many extra stars did the movie get for all that? And I only put it at 3.5 stars. And right now, it just didn't have that feel.
Yeah.
And exactly as you said, like it just something was missing from it, or maybe it just didn't have that polish on it. To me, I'll probably put this movie at a 4-star rating. I've put a couple other recent horror movies at 4 stars. I think I'll have to elevate them up to like 4.5 in response to this 4-star rating. But the fact is, it was a lot of fun. And I look forward to watching this again. Like, I think this is a good horror comedy. It's a good Nick Cage movie. Nicholas Hoult is great. Everyone in it is pretty solid. There's not a lot of negative that I can take away from the movie, especially when it's only 90 minutes long. Like, I'll think about, the B plot with the mafia stuff was a little much, but in 6 months' time, when I go grab like the 4K of this movie, and I'm thinking I have an hour and a half to spend, pop this on, it's going to go by like nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, for sure. Maybe part of it was the experience too, because like, being in the theater, in those amazing recliner seats.
It
was a small but positive audience. Yeah, the whole thing was it was the fun factor, right? This is a movie that you can just go, like you said, 90 minutes, and you leave with a smile on your face, and you leave like I don't know. I felt energized, like you and I think both went and watched the original Dracula. Now I'm on a Dracula kick. I have a list of Dracula movies I'm trying to track down now and to watch. Like it just, whatever reason, it inspired me and to go down this rabbit hole, this project. So I don't know, like something about it was refreshing, I guess. I don't know, it was a nice refreshing movie in the sea of a lot of the other movies I've seen recently, I guess.
We're going to have to revisit our vampire film genre episode and in like a few months' time after we watch a bunch more vampires and really revisit that stuff. But we also, we want to talk about some of the ratings around the internet. We have 3 major sites that we pull from. Rotten Tomatoes, obviously everyone's familiar with that. 2 ratings. You have the critic rating and the audience rating. And I like quizzing you, if you haven't looked it up before, what do you think the critic rating is on this movie?
Which site is this?
Rotten Tomatoes.
I'm gonna guess that they did not. This is not fresh on the critic side. I say
it's not fresh.
I'm gonna say 52.
Pretty close. It was 57%.
Okay,
and their fresh cutoff is about 60%. Okay. So it's close. It's close. Audience rating
65.
Not as close. We're at a 79% there.
Oh, awesome. That's great.
Which is kind of surprising. I don't do a lot of analytics on Rotten Tomatoes figures here, but it's like 79% to me seems high, but then you have such a low box office. What did audiences really think? And maybe, I think it goes back to what you said initially, the advertising was possibly no good at all. It did not entice people to come out to see this movie. And, by the time, our positive review of this movie comes out, it's long out of the theaters. Yeah. It'll probably be on streaming or video on demand in a couple weeks' time. IMDb, they use 10-point system. It's at 6.7.
Okay.
And Letterboxd has a 3.2 average amongst its users, which, it's roughly around the same thing.
Yeah,
we're not too far off from our initial impression of like 3.5 to the Letterboxd average, and I kind of think it'll be bumped up to 4 stars for sure.
Yeah, just for the fun fact, I just had a ton of fun watching this movie. I think audiences will too if you go in with the right expectations. I think if you like you mentioned the new Evil Dead, but like if you're a fan of the old Evil Deads, or if you're a fan of any of that kind of stuff, like American Werewolf in London, even that kind of horror comedy blend, and like this is, if you like your horror, both menacing and gory, this is for you, especially the really gory bit at the end. They show a little bit of it, but when they completely dismember Dracula after capturing him in a magical circle made of cocaine or heroin, and they like chop him up into little bits, put him in encased with little bits in concrete, and then dump that down the sewer or something. Like it's just like when you actually start to think about that, it's pretty horrific. All the stuff in this is pretty horrific, over the top.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I think anybody who's a fan of like that kind of over the top geysers of blood style, kind of anime style violence, this is gonna be right up your alley, as well as people who love comedy. Yeah, that's the thing too. I think it has a wide appeal, and it's a real shame that it's not getting the love at the box office. I want to see the Frankenstein and Wolfman spin-offs in this universe. Who could play like Frankenstein or the Invisible Man or Wolfman to Nicolas Cage's Dracula? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've had the Invisible Man recently, and I couldn't tell you the actor who played him, and it was like a very different type of film.
That was just straight horror, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like Frankenstein in this style.
Oh my God. Frankenstein needs to be John Travolta.
John Travolta. Oh, I don't know, man.
And then they switch faces. Dracula and Frankenstein face off. There you go. There's Face Off 2 and the sequel to Renfield. Bring it all together. Boom.
Perfect. Here's a sad detail from Wikipedia.
Uh-oh.
Is that this is Nicolas Cage's first live-action film with a major studio since Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance in 2011.
With a major studio, really?
Yeah, this is Universal Studio Pictures.
Okay.
He's done basically small production companies, indie films in the past like 12 years.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild. But that kind of wraps us up for this episode. As always, thank you for listening. It's always a pleasure to put these together. And go enjoy your film journey. Go check out some vampire films and Dracula stuff. Don't be afraid of going back to that original stuff. What Nathan needs to do now is go watch Nosferatu, which I think was a 1923 vampire film.
Which is
fantastic.
Yeah. Based on some ambiguous copyright laws, was based on the original Dracula. They were sued out of existence, but luckily somebody in the States snagged a copy, and there was other loopholes in the copyright law, and that's why that movie still exists today. It's great. The whole background of the story is crazy, and I have to go check out that original 1929 version. Yeah, that's a silent film, I think.